Hare Krishna, everyone. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, or Dandavat Pranams, whichever Sangha or Mat you're part of. I wanted to talk a bit today about the Gaudiya Math. I don't have many bugbears in life. I don't have many things that irritate me or frustrate me, because things generally don't. My views on life are quite liberal, quite open-minded, quite progressive. But one of the very slight bugbears that I guess I've developed through undertaking this research into Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the UK is that the way people refer to and reference something called the Gaudiya Math. I remember certainly in my early days of ISKCON, we were taught to believe and led to believe that Gaudiya Vaishnavism could be cut or formed into two groups, ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math. And that the Gaudiya Math was a rival organisation to ISKCON. It had its own saints and gurus and acharyas and its own festivals and its own, maybe even its own scriptures and its own temples. And it was something that shouldn't be, people shouldn't get involved with it. And that was certainly a view that I thought was widespread. It was a very black and white view of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, ISKCON or Gaudiya Math. Up until a few years ago, when I started to do my own research on Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the UK and the world. And something that still comes up, I hear it often amongst devotees, amongst scholars, amongst gurus, is this reference to the Gaudiya Math. And I was chatting to a devotee in the International Pure Bhakti Yoga Society just recently, which is the Narayana Maharaj Sangha, and we were talking about the references of the Gaudiya Math, and he saw it from the other side of the fence, if you like. He was in the Gaudiya Math, and you know, my own spiritual background was not in the Gaudiya Math; it was in ISKCON. So before I give an answer on does the Gaudiya Math still exist, I want to just explain what the Gaudiya Math, what we certainly did mean by it. So the Gaudiya Math was an organisation formed by, note the key word there, organisation, formed by His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, in 1918. 1918 was the year he took sannyas, and the Gaudiya Math was an organisation or an institution, use that word very lightly, that he formed, that he established to use as a vehicle to spread Krishna consciousness, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Bhakti Yoga around India and ultimately the world. So he took the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, he took the teachings from his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So just anyone in the Sarasvat line will know that in the line of acharyas, we're taught that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's guru was actually Gaur Kadur Das Babaji. It wasn't actually Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was his father. So the Gaudiya Math was about creating this organisation that could spread those teachings around India. It was formed in 1918. Its original name was the Sri Chaitanya Math, and it didn't take on the name the Gaudiya Math until 1920. So fast forward to 1937. 1937 was the year that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur passed away. And when he passed away, or when he left this mortal plane, the Gaudiya Math was in a very strong position, certainly materially. There were 64 mats, so we could translate the word mat into mission. There were 64 mats or missions around India, and he had the intention, certainly what was laid out in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's will, was that a governing body commission, where have we heard that before? A governing body commission should be formed, or a group of trustees should be formed to take forward the teachings of the Gaudiya Math. Well, what happened is what we see with other religious traditions, is once a charismatic leader passes away or dies, basically, there's often an argument or disagreement over leadership. There were disagreements over who should be the next acharya. And what we see that within 12 to 24 months after Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj passed away, the Gaudiya Math then formed. It had basically broken up completely. So as an organization, it didn't exist anymore. So I pretty much already answered the question to this talk. And then 2 other groups were formed. The Sri Chaitanya, just to get the names absolutely right, the Sri Chaitanya Math was one branch that came from that, and the other one was the Gaudiya Mission, which was another branch that came from that. So the Sri Chaitanya Math was headed by Srila Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. He was a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And then the Gaudiya Mission was headed by Ananta Vasudev Prabhu, who later took sannyas and was given the name Srila Bhakti Prasad Puri Maharaj. And it's that second branch, or that second group, that the UK, Gaudiya Mission UK, based in Wilston, has its lineage or has its links. It's that group that then took on the relationship with the UK devotees, which we now know did exist in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Those that have watched an earlier talk of mine will know that. Anyone out there who is a bit of a history buff or a religious studies buff will know that a lot of other religious traditions have had these schisms or these disagreements. If you look at Islam, after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, after he passed away, there were disagreements over what would happen next, over succession, over the right form of Islam. I was reading just recently about the early days of Methodism. So anyone who knows Methodism, the Methodist Church, is a form of Christianity. It's actually where I started my own religious life 20 years ago as a 16-year-old kid in the Methodist Church. The Methodists are Protestant Christians who believe strongly in social action. They're not really into the whole hellfire and brimstone thing, which is a relief, and they're very strongly into social action. And John Wesley and his brother Charles Wesley were the founders of the Methodist Church, 1770s, 1780s, around the same time as the American independence. As the Americans gained their independence and the British, the Methodist Church was growing in the UK. There was a bit of a revival in terms of Protestant Christianity. And then if you look, though, after John Wesley passed away, lots of forms of Methodism came about. There was the Methodist Church, the Wesleyan Methodists, the Primitive Methodists, the new Anabaptist Methodists. There's lots of Methodists who were looking for methods to promote God consciousness. So what happened with the Gaudiya Math in 1937, 38, 39 had happened hundreds of times before around the world with the division of previous groups. So this question of does the Gaudiya Math still exist? Well, I've already answered the question. In its institutional form, it doesn't. Hasn't existed for some 80, 83, 84 years since Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur passed away. Now, I'm very strongly of the view, and I hope this doesn't upset any devotees who have different views from this, but in reality, Gaudiya Vaishnavism isn't black and white. It isn't as a case of ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math. If you look at what's happened to the descendants of the Gaudiya Math, or the descendants of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, actually over time, lots of different mats and lots of different sanghas were formed after 1938, 1939. So there's those 2 other groups, the Sri Chaitanya Math and also the Gaudiya Mission. And then what happened later on is a lot of those disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur became a bit fed up and felt very disenfranchised and disillusioned with what was happening. So they founded their own mats. They founded their own sanghas. So the first to be formed was the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti in 1940, long time ago, by Keshava Maharaj. Keshava Maharaj, many of you may have heard of him. So Keshava Maharaj is the guru to Narayan Maharaj and also the sannyas guru to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And anyone who has seen a previous video on here will know that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, the founder Acharya of ISKCON, was one of the original trustees of the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti in 1940. But bit later on, the Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Math was formed in 1941 by Srila Sridhar Maharaj. The Sri Chaitanya Gaudiya Math was formed in 1953 by Bhakti Daita Madhava Maharaj, the predecessor to Bhakti Ballabha Tirtha Maharaj. ISKCON was then formed some 15, 16 years later in 1966 in New York. You've also got the Science of Identity Foundation. That's a bit of an offshoot of ISKCON. So actually, it's not a case of ISKCON and Gaudiya Math. It's not a kind of black and white issue. Actually, it's Gaudiya Math doesn't exist anymore in its original institutionalized form. And actually, there's lots of splinter groups, lots of branches. And one of those branches is ISKCON. There's tens of branches, possibly hundreds of branches, but there's certainly tens of branches that come from the Gaudiya Math. And ISKCON is probably the biggest of the branches. It's got the biggest girth. It's the biggest size, but it's by no means separate from the Gaudiya Math. If you look at what Srila Prabhupada brought to the West, everything that Srila Prabhupada brought to the West was taught to him by his guru, who was the founder Acharya of the Gaudiya Math. Obviously, Prabhupada might have adapted some things to appeal to a Western audience, but ultimately, Prabhupada was bringing the philosophy of the Gaudiya Math to a Western audience. Now, let's fast forward a bit and look at some of the other schisms, some of the other divisions that have happened in Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the Sarasvat line. So why do I keep emphasizing the Sarasvat line? The Sarasvat line is the line of teachings that started with Srila Bhaktivedanta Sarasvati Thakur Maharaj. Those of you who have been following this Facebook page for a while, who have watched some of my films before, will know that there was... there is differences of opinion how Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur formed the current line of acharyas that we see in most ISKCON temples, in other temples that come in the same family. Those line of 5 gurus, Bhaktivedanta Thakur, Jagannath Das Babaji first, and those 5 line of teachers. How did that come about? I've talked a bit before about Bipin Bihari Goswami. Bipin Bihari Goswami was the Diksha Guru of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but for different reasons, he was excluded from the line of acharyas by Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur. That's not an opinion that he was excluded, that's fact that he was excluded. The opinions are based around why he was excluded. I can send anyone some papers on that. I'm currently writing the chapter on the issue of spiritual inheritance, so a lot of this is fresh in my mind in terms of Bipin Bihari Goswami, his relationship with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So in terms of modern day schisms, it wasn't just the Gaudiya Math that had its problems after 1938, 1939. There's been lots of schisms. Schism is an academic word for religious division. Literally, if religions separate, it's called a schism. Not a very attractive word. There's been lots of schisms. You look at that in the last 20 or 30 years. ISKCON's quite interesting because ISKCON actually, after Srila Prabhupada left the world, ISKCON actually didn't break up like some people thought it might. ISKCON didn't disseminate into lots of different groups. Actually, it stayed intact. ISKCON certainly had its problems and its troubles over the decades, but actually ISKCON has stayed intact largely since 1977, since the passing of Srila Prabhupada. There's been lots of offshoots from ISKCON. So, for example, offshoots of ISKCON would be, and there's been different ways that different groups have offshooted from ISKCON. So some of the more obvious offshoots of ISKCON would be the Sri Chaitanya Sangha, founded by Tipurara Swami in 1986. The Science of Identity Foundation is another offshoot of ISKCON, founded by Jagat Guru Satsvarupananda Maharaj. He's still with us, he's still alive, he's in Hawaii. He is an interesting character, or interesting personality rather, because he kind of left ISKCON soon after Prabhupada left the world. He didn't stick around for any of the politics or the problems, and he founded the Science of Identity Foundation in 1978, probably quite soon after Prabhupada left. And also Vrinda, the Vrinda Institute for Vaishnava Culture and Studies is another offshoot of ISKCON, founded by a Paramadvaita Swami, who I believe is not in Sannyas Ashram anymore. I'm not quite sure what's happening with him. But other offshoots of ISKCON would be the Sri Chaitanya Grace Place, founded by Sri Gaura Hari Das. He is a very eccentric personality who was... he is actually a disciple of Krishna Maharaj in that formal Diksha sense. He was in ISKCON in the 80s, and he's left now to form his own organisation. Other groups that I would say are offshoots of ISKCON. Some of you might disagree with this, but there are 3 Ritvik groups in the UK which are actually offshoots of ISKCON, because they take the philosophy of ISKCON, and it's been changed slightly around the position or the status of gurus, but ultimately they are ISKCON offshoots. And there are 3 of them. There's Hare Krishna London, which follows the Ritvik order. There's the IRM, which still exists. They're an offshoot of ISKCON. And there's Bliss, which is a relatively new Ritvik organisation, and they're also based in London as well. But it's not just ISKCON. Wherever there's human beings, you will have disagreements and you will have problems. It's not just ISKCON that has had its schisms or divisions over the years. The Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math, founded by Srila Sridhar Maharaj, it's also had various divisions over the years. I've identified 3 schisms, or 3 different groups that are offshoots of the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math that will have some active presence in the UK. So you've got the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math Global International, which was founded by Kanan Giri Maharaj. And Kanan Giri Maharaj is based in America at the moment. I've shared some of his stuff on here before. And again, the issue there is around the disagreements over succession. So Govinda Maharaj was the successor to Sri Sridhar Maharaj. After Govinda Maharaj left, there was lots of disagreements then over who should inherit certain things. The Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Sridhar Mandir and the Sri Chaitanya Sridhar Math are also offshoots of that as well. And also, certainly in the UK, the Narayana Maharaj group is actually registered under different names in different cities. So in Birmingham, the Narayana Maharaj temple is still, in terms of the charity commission, registered under the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti. And then Narayana Maharaj amicably left the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti in 2004 to form the International Pure Bhakti Yoga Society, which has a temple in London, Ganga Matas. And also, I don't think I've mentioned it on this page before, but the International Pure Bhakti Yoga Society, the Narayana Maharaj Sangha, is about to open a new temple in Skegness as well. It's kind of like a rural retreat centre, and I've seen some really good photos of it, and I should share it on this page soon. So as well as those issues that the Gaudiya Math had, in 1938, 1939, there's been lots of modern divisions and schisms as well. What we're seeing more of now in London, which I think is a good thing, is you're seeing devotees not being necessarily so tied to institution. There's a growing number of devotees that don't want to be tied to an institution, that actually want to have the freedom to, I don't know, listen to Nemi Maharaj in the International Pure Bhakti Yoga Society on a Saturday, and then listen to Madhusudan Maharaj and the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math on a the day after, Friday, Saturday, and on the Sunday go to, I don't know, Bhaktivedanta Manor and listen to Radhanath Swami. And there's a growing number of devotees who would say that's okay. It's okay, actually, to go to different sanghas and different mats. So, does the Gaudiya Math still exist? Well, the answer is no. The Gaudiya Math doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed in its institutional form or its institutional format since 1937, 1938. Is ISKCON in direct competition with the Gaudiya Math? Well, the answer is no, because ISKCON, you could argue, is an offshoot of the Gaudiya Math, of what was the Gaudiya Math. As are other groups' offshoots. It is a child, or it is a successor to the Gaudiya. Maybe successor is a more positive word. ISKCON is a successor to the Gaudiya Math. And actually, it's trying to achieve what all the other Gaudiya Vaishnava Sanghas are doing, which is spreading Krishna consciousness around the UK, around the world, distributing prasadam, distributing books, and encouraging people to take up the Yuga Dharma for this age, which is chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. The means of liberation or salvation, or the best means for liberation or salvation in this age, is through the chanting of the names of God, which in the Vedic texts say are Krishna, Rama and Hare. And by chanting this mantra, this is the best way to achieve liberation in this age. Hare Krishna.